Way back in 2012, I was about 9 months into my tenure here. That's been a while. At the time, it was brand new. I was at a meeting, and I've told this story before, but it informs my thoughts this morning. I was at a meeting with a number of people from the community leaders, county officials, and whatnot. And I was asked a question. Basically, and I put it in quotation marks in my notes, but I don't know the exact words that were said. Can the churches help CYS, with Children Youth Services, with kids that are sleeping on the floor? Can we get them beds? Because CYS can't leave a child sleeping on the floor. If that's the condition the home is in, they have to remove the kid. And they don't want to remove the kid just because their parents are poor. So they said, can the churches fix that? And of course, I had absolutely no reason to say yes, other than the fact that I said yes. And thus was born the idea that became Mustard Seed Missions. But there were a couple of objections that stood in our way. And had we stopped and thought about them more, they might have seemed more daunting. And first of all, of course, is that we didn't really have a history, either our church or different churches, of working with the government on this kind of thing. And some people might object and say, well, I don't trust the government. I don't want to work with the government. And of course, if you're paying any attention at all to our political discussions in our country today, there are a number of people who think the government is the enemy on both the right and the left. Oddly, they dislike each other, even though they both dislike. Weird. Second objection might simply be, well, we can't do that ourselves. Our church of a few dozen people, we're not going to have the resources for the whole county. Can we work with other churches? Is it okay for us to work with Lutherans and Methodists and Catholics and Episcopalians and the Alliance Church and everybody else? Because some of us in the Christian church distrust and dislike and are afraid of other churches. And so we had some fear to overcome. We had some hesitancy to overcome. But we really had an important question. Can we do some good for people in need or not? Or would things stop us from doing what is right? Some of the things that sometimes stop us from doing what is right as a church or as an individual are the momentum of how it's always done. This is the way we do it. We can't do it another way because it's the way we do it. The other thing that sometimes stops us is the fear of the unknown. But what if we start down this path? What about this? What about that? So we sometimes get stuck. Sometimes can't move forward. Sometimes can't do what is right because of the things that are in our way. Keep that thought in mind. We look at the text of Mark chapter 2. This is where we left off last week. So Mark chapter 2, verse 23 says this: One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what's unlawful on the Sabbath?" We're going to need a little bit of context here to figure out what's going on. Deuteronomy 23:25 adds some insight. It says, "If you enter your neighbor's grain field, you may pick kernels with your hands." You might not know that. The law of Moses said if you walk through your neighbor's field or you walk along his field, if you want, and it's ripe, right? It wouldn't do any good to pick kernels when they're not there. You can grab a few and pop them in your mouth and eat them. An odd thing perhaps for the law to talk about, but it was perfectly clearly lawful for Jesus or anyone else to do this. So it's not, you remember the episode of Everybody Loves Raymond where Frank goes to the supermarket and the bulk food and he's just picking some out? That's not what this is. They're not upset with Jesus for putting his hands in the bulk food container. That's not the issue. The entirety of the discussion is the Sabbath. This happened on a Sabbath. And interestingly, over the years, the rabbis had voluminous discussions about what does it mean to work on the Sabbath, right? Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. On this day you shall do no work. Well, what's work? Is work just your job, right? That's how we think of it when you're at work, when you're doing work for your job. You don't really think of yard work as the same kind of work as when you're on the clock. But maybe you do, because maybe you hate yard work or doing the dishes or cooking lunch. What is work? They eventually described 39 things that constituted work on the Sabbath. And you couldn't do any of those 39. Of course, they were open for debate and they continued to argue about it. One of the things on the list was reaping. You can't harvest your grain on the Sabbath. You see where this is going? Is walking along and picking a few and popping them in your mouth, is that reaping? It's not what you or I would think of as reaping, where you're trying to clear the whole field, right? Nobody's got a combine out there. Nobody's doing any of that kind of labor. The Pharisees, however, are looking at the situation and saying they're reaping. That's unlawful on the Sabbath. You see, the law of Moses had specifically allowed Jesus or anyone to pick individual heads of grain. How many individual heads of grain do you need to pick before it becomes reaping? Right? That's a technical question. So I ask you this: did God give people his law in a way that he expected them to need lawyers in order to obey it? Did God expect that it would take this kind of argumentation for his people to obey the law? Or did he expect it to be plain enough for your average Joe to be able to figure it out on their own? Now, if you know anything about our current political and cultural situation, you know that lawyers and lawsuits are expected in American business and especially American politics. Anytime Congress passes a bill and the president signs it or it goes over a veto, unless it's about something that nobody cares about, it ends up in court, right? Somebody is always going to sue because they don't like the change to this law or that policy, because they say it wasn't done right, they say it's unconstitutional. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're not, but it ends up in the courts. This has been a growing trend in the recent generation. We see this all the time, both sides willing to go to court at just about everything. This election is an example, is it not? Democrats in some states suing about election laws, Republicans in other states suing about election laws. I think in Pennsylvania, both sides were suing about election laws. Lawyers necessary for us to have the law applied. But is that the way God wanted it to be? Did he want the Pharisees or people like them to be the arbiters of what the law says? What does it actually mean? How do we apply it? Which, of course, points to a larger question. What was the purpose of the law? Why on earth did God give Moses the law at Sinai? You ever wonder about that? Why did he do that? What was he thinking? Well, the most obvious answer is that he had told his people, "Be holy because I am holy." They need a little more than that. Be like God is a good place to start, but you need some details, right? What kinds of actions would God do? God is a spirit. God's not here walking amongst us. So in order for us to understand how God would act, God's going to have to give us some examples. What are the kinds of things God wouldn't do? What are the kinds of things God would do? And the law fills in a lot of those. Helps people see what the definition of righteousness is. Secondly, remember when they came up out of Egypt, they were a tribe. They were not a nation, but they were heading toward a promised land. They were going to inhabit a new land. They needed some kind of governance. They needed some kind of understanding so that it wouldn't be chaos, so that when they went into the land, it wouldn't be every man for his own self. They tried that at some point here in the near future in the book of Judges. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. That didn't go well. The law was supposed to prevent that, to give boundaries. And thirdly, the point of the law that Paul talked about in our passage from Romans that we looked at, and throughout other parts of his writing, the law was given to make clear the need for grace. The law was given so that we would all say, okay, I get it. Be holy because I am holy. That's too much. I can't do that by myself. So what's going on here? How is Jesus going to respond to being told that picking a few heads of grain constitutes reaping, and therefore he's in the wrong? Different direction entirely. Verse 25, he answered, have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar, the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions. One of the things that bothers me to no end is whataboutism. You ask somebody, is this action bad? And rather than answering the question, they say, well, what about this person who also did something bad? Let's change the subject. That's not what Jesus is doing here. Because he's not saying, I did something wrong, but David did something worse, so why aren't you mad at David? He's actually saying, I didn't do anything wrong, and neither did David. But that requires a little unpacking. Because 1 Samuel 21, 1-6 contains the passage that Jesus is talking about David, when David was on the run and in need. And he's talking about consecrated bread. Maybe you need the context. They put 12 loaves of bread in the holy place on a table with fresh loaves every Sabbath. And then they took the old loaves and the priests ate them. David comes in the middle of the week, takes the loaves of bread and says, hey, we need to eat. This can't wait till the Sabbath until there's fresh ones. That was contrary to the law, to the letter of the law. David did something that was against the rules. And yet there is no condemnation in the text of 1 Samuel saying, David did this even though he wasn't supposed to do it. You know, he kind of, There's none of that. Why? There's a fascinating term called exigent circumstances. Exigent circumstances are when there are things going on that make it so that the normal rules don't necessarily apply. If the law is ironclad and has no wiggle room, it can't be made to see when violating the law, the letter of the law, is actually an act of justice or mercy or love. And sometimes that's the case. Sometimes following the law to the letter is an injustice. Sometimes obeying the law in every speck and detail is a problem. Because there you are disobeying the spirit of the law. So Jesus is posing through this example about David a fundamental question, and he's going to tell them the answer to this question in a minute. He's asking them, was the law given to help us or hurt us? What is the purpose of the law? Is the law to be our guide or our governess? You know those old movies or whatever where there's a governess and the governess walks around with this stern look saying, don't do that. Don't do that, keeping this rich kid out of trouble. Now, the law is both of those things. It is both a guide and sometimes it is a punishment. It is a way of keeping us in line. But that reminds me of how we think about parenting. Why is it that we make children follow rules? We have a lot of rules. Now, some of them are clearly for their safety, right? You don't do certain things because you're going to get yourself injured or killed. So those are obvious rules. But we have a lot of other rules. Are our rules for our children about being the boss, about being in control and telling them what to do? Or are we actually trying to teach them some wisdom? Are we actually trying to teach them so that when they grow up, they're hopefully decent human beings, right? What is the purpose behind our rules? Which makes me wonder, what kind of father is God? What kind of father would God be when dealing with us and our failures to obey all of his rules? Jesus has some insight into these thoughts. 27 says this, "Then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." Jesus is not that far from Jewish mainstream in this. Rabbi Simeon ben Mavoyan in AD 180. So a couple generations after this wrote, "The Sabbath has been committed to you, not you to the Sabbath." I don't know if he was aware of the Gospel of Mark talking about Jesus saying this or not, but he said the exact same thing. You see, God's law is a lot more than what we as parents fall back on when we're put in a corner. When your kid asks you why, and you don't have a good reason, what do you say? You know the answer to this question. Because I said so. Because I said so is our Maginot line. That's what we fall back on and say, I'm going to make a stand here. Because I said so. The law of God is a little better than because I said so. God has thought about it a little bit more. He's got purpose in it. And the Sabbath observance is an example of that trend in the entire law. Consider the Sabbath. The Sabbath was created before Adam and Eve, right? The book of Genesis talks about God completing his work. This is before there was any formal law. God said this day is holy. And that concept, that idea ends up in the Ten Commandments. Humanity was not designed to serve the Sabbath. It was designed to benefit from the Sabbath. The law of God, the purpose of the law of God is our own good. And that is something that we cannot lose track of. Understand this, God was already holy. When God gave the law to Moses, when God started interacting with mankind, God was already holy. God did not need to be shown what was right and wrong. God was going to do what was right because God always does what is right. The law is not about him. The law is about us. We needed guidance. We needed protection from ourselves. We needed to be shown what was dangerous. We needed to be shown where the dead ends were, where the self-destructive tendencies led. Is that how we understand morality today? We don't really talk about law as much. We talk more about ethics and morality and right and wrong. Is that how we look at it? Is it helping increase our righteousness and our holiness? Because if that's not what we're doing with our discussions about ethics and morality and our promotion of those ideas, then something's not right. If it's actually being counterproductive. And I think that's an important question when we interact with other Christians or non-believers, whether it's online or in person. When we champion morality, and we need to do it because somebody needs to defend morality and speak up for what is right and defend the innocent and protect the weak and all of that stuff, that prophetic duty. Are we helping people be more moral in our efforts? I know the kind of person who isn't, and that's the guy that you see every once in a while, and there's a guy like this all over the country. I've seen one in person that stands on a street corner with a big sign that lists all the things that God hates, and he shouts at people. God hates this, and God hates that, and God hates this. That's not actually helping anyone with morality. It's pushing people away. This is not an easy question to answer for us because the prophets were not welcome. Nobody wanted Jeremiah and Isaiah and the rest of the prophets. They were not welcomed by most of the people because the people didn't want to hear that they were sinners. They didn't want to hear that their society was unjust. Nobody wanted the prophets. Not nobody, but the majority of people did not want the prophets. But God sent them anyway. He laid that burden upon them to speak. Think about the calling of Isaiah. Go and speak to a people that aren't going to listen. Well, let's sign me up for that job. That sounds like a whole lot of fun. And yet God sent him. So this is a difficulty for us. This is especially a difficulty for us at this time in our culture, when biblical morality is a little more countercultural than it used to be. How do we share that with compassion and wisdom? How do we do it effectively with grace and truth? These are ongoing questions, not offering the answers to these questions this morning, but simply saying we need to be asking them. We need to be thinking about them. Or, if we don't, we might end up as the people in the second half of this passage, and that's the last thing we want to be. Let's look at that example. Another time, Jesus went into the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. Now, I don't know about you, but I would imagine that if you went to a worship service for the very purpose of trying to accuse someone of doing wrong, that you might be there for the wrong reason. That's a dangerous road to go down. I'm going to go to church this week because I just know that minister's going to say something and then I can get him. Oops, that's not good. Something is wrong in your thinking if that's why you are there. But that's why they were there. Those same rabbis that decided there were 39 things that were work also had decided that, well, healing really shouldn't be done on the Sabbath unless somebody's in the process of dying, right? If someone looks like they're dying, then by all means try to save their life, even if it takes work. But if it looks like they'll be fine till tomorrow, if they're just in pain, right, or if it's just a difficulty, put a Band-Aid on it and wait till tomorrow, right? Don't go for non-life-threatening things. Interesting. The Sabbath observance, I was on the wrong spot. The people that were in opposition to Jesus conceded that he could heal. Did you notice that in this passage? They wanted to see if he would heal on the Sabbath, which means they knew that he could heal the sick and those in need, rather than figuring out what to do with that information. Rather than coming to terms with the fact that God had given Jesus the power to heal, they were in opposition to that gift from God. There's something very wrong in their thinking. How twisted does your thinking get when you use religion to hurt people? Not good. But we need not look far into history. We need not look much past current events to see killing, torture, rape, pillaging, destroying in the name of God. We know that people can get this twisted around. The Crusaders yelling, "God wills it," as the streets of Jerusalem ran with blood. They slaughtered the Muslims and the Jews that were there. People can get that messed up in their religious thinking that they think that the law of God demands what they're doing, that they think the will of God is asking them to do what they're doing, when what they're doing is evil. People can get so mixed up in their religious thinking that they'll even use the peacefulness of the kindness of others against them. That's what they're doing here. They knew that Jesus was compassionate. They knew that he had mercy on people that were suffering, and they said, we can use that against him. If he's so compassionate that he heals on the Sabbath, we've got him. So what does Jesus do? That's how twisted their minds were. Jesus said to the men with the shriveled hands, stand up in front of everyone. I love what he does here. He says, we're not playing your game. Jesus knew exactly what he was doing. He was well aware that the consensus opinion of the rabbis was that non-life-threatening needs could wait until after the Sabbath. How long did Jesus have to wait until the Sabbath ended? Half a day. He could have waited. He could have said to the man, come back after sundown and I will heal you. How long has this man had a shriveled hand? He probably could have waited a few more hours. He's not in the middle of bleeding to death. It was okay to wait. It could have been excused by Jesus. But he says, no, I'm going to make a point. Stand up in front of everyone so I can make a point here. Because the underlying issue that Jesus is contending for is worth the fight that he's about to have with the Pharisees. Let's look at his underlying issue. Verse 4 says this, then Jesus asked them, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill? But they remained silent. See, the Pharisees and the rabbis and those in their camp had made the law a little more difficult than it needed to be. Jesus says it's not that hard a question. This is a rhetorical question, by the way, right? Evil and killing are wrong no matter what day of the week it is. It's not more evil to kill on the Sabbath than it is to kill on Tuesday. It's still evil. But Jesus says, then why are we limiting good to 6 days a week? If evil is evil every day, how come good is only good 6 days a week? Something's not right. Because evil should always be restrained and prevented and punished, and good should always be encouraged and assisted and rewarded. The question of whether or not something is good is far more important than the question of how and where and when someone is trying to do good. And that's where they were messed up. They were stuck on the minutia. They were stuck on the when and the where and the how, instead of thinking about he's doing good. And good is the most important thing. Can you imagine us having that conversation? I remember when I was a kid, there was quite a bit of conversation about the things we could do on a Sunday afternoon. Could you watch TV? Could you play cards? Could you hang out with your friends? What are you actually supposed to do on a Sunday afternoon? Can you imagine if that conversation had said, well, don't do that. That's a good thing. You can't do that today. Don't help your neighbor today. It's Sunday. Can you imagine that? Maybe you can. What does it say about our thought processes, about our attitudes, about our motives if we fail to support those who are doing good? Or worse yet, like the Pharisees, if we oppose those who do good because they're not doing it the way we want it done, or they're not doing it when we want it done, or how we want it done. If we do that, we're every bit as lost as they are. And when you're lost, you know what the most important thing to do is? Admit you're lost. Admit that you don't know where you are or where you're going. Figure out how it is that you got lost and get yourself back where you're supposed to be. Have you ever had that sinking feeling driving down the road? This was more of a thing when we only had Rand McNally to help us rather than the GPS on your phone. But you ever had that sinking feeling and you're driving down the road and saying, shouldn't we have seen that turn by now? This doesn't look right. And you've got a couple of choices. You can keep going and assume that eventually you'll get where you're going. But when you see the sign that says, "Welcome to Florida," you realize maybe I am going the wrong way because we were headed to Connecticut, so something's not right. You don't want to go that far. Or you can stop and ask directions, which of course, that's verboten. We don't do that. Or you could turn around and go back the way you came. I actually had an incident of this summer. You think, how could this happen in the world of GPS? Well, it did. We went to Hocking Hills in southern Ohio, and guess what? My phone has 0 bars in that whole area. GPS on the phone didn't work. And of course, we don't actually have a map in our car anymore. Why would we? We had the county map of Hocking Hills, but once you left the county, you're off the edge of the map. And so I said to myself, we need to go northeast to get back to Franklin. So I'll just go north on roads that go north or east, right? And we'll get back to the highway eventually. But I got to a point that said, road closed ahead in 6 miles, local traffic only. That was east. And I said, we can't go that way anymore. And I went back like 100 yards to the intersection to turn the road north. And it said, road closed ahead, 5 miles, local traffic only. And Nicole was there. I said to myself, I don't want to go south, right? That's not the right direction. So we went back west, about 15 miles to the last turn, and then went on a road north. But it wouldn't have done us any good to keep going until we got to where that bridge was out, or to try to Dukes of Hazzard jump the bridge. That actually doesn't work. Don't try that with your car. You'll wreck your car. And I don't think it would have helped us to go south. Sometimes our thinking as Christians is so messed up that we just need to stop and say, how do I get back to the truth? How do I get back to mercy and compassion and grace? Because where I'm at is not right. And once we start opposing good, just because it's not our kind of good, we know we're going down that path. Do you know any Christians like that? Who are so messed up in their thinking that love and compassion and grace, they're not even on the view anymore. Can't even see them from where they're at. Are you like that? Have you ever been like that? Maybe about one issue? Or maybe with one person or one kind of person? So messed up in that. What does Jesus do? They said nothing, right? They got no answer. He looked around at them in anger and deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts, said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was completely restored. Then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus. Do you get the idea that they didn't learn the lesson? He was trying to teach them something about grace, and they took it the wrong way, because they went out with the Herodians, the people that support King Herod, who they don't like, to try to figure out how they could kill Jesus. So yeah, in this case, Jesus' message didn't work. But it was the right lesson. Why was Jesus angry? Jesus was angry at them because they couldn't answer his question, because in their minds, law was more important than people. In their way of thinking, the law was a tool to bludgeon people back into line. Not to instruct them, not to edify them, not to build them up, but to tear them down and put them in their place. The root of their inflexibility, the text tells us, was a stubborn heart. This is not what the people of God are supposed to be. We are not supposed to be a people that care more about the form of how we do what we do than the heart of the matter. We're not supposed to be a people that care more about the letter of the law than the spirit of the law. So Jesus took action to refute the error that he found and help the man that was in need. So when we see Christians, or ourselves, but when we see Christians, especially in our own church or our own community, right, ones that we know, acting without love, it is necessary that we do something about it. That we don't just sit back and say, oh, that's just too bad. You see, the reputation of the gospel is at stake, and real people are being hurt or led astray when Christianity has no grace and no love in it. One of the problems that you might run into in such a situation is that the person that you're trying to help, the person that you're trying to show the light to, might believe that you're the person that needs to be corrected. You might say to them, I can help you see this clearly, and they're going to turn it around and say, oh, no, let me help you see it clearly. I've been there before. And that's not an easy place to be. You see, God's defenders that don't have love and grace and mercy in their hearts are really dangerous people. But we need to do what we can. You see, it is not possible to defend God in a way that is in opposition to the character of God. God does not need us to defend right and wrong and morality and ethics in a way that goes against the character of God. That makes no sense. If we're not acting like Christ-like people, we're not helping the kingdom of God no matter what issue we're fighting for. Even if we're sincere, even if we're motivated, even if we sacrifice from our own time and money and resources, we're not helping the kingdom of God if we're not doing so in a way that conforms to the character of God. We're pretty passionate people about pro-life issues, are we not? About the lives of the unborn. But if we fight that fight in a way that denies the character of God, what good are we doing? We're winning a battle to lose a war. We're going against the way that God has told us to be in order to try to defend something that is true and right and good. But we can't go down that road, because when we do, we end up like Pharisees. How do we defend the rights of the unborn? Let me give you a list of things that we should be doing that would help. Their love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. I didn't make that list up, by the way. That's the fruit of the Spirit. The way in which you defend truth, the way in which you protect the innocent, the way in which you help those in need is through the fruit of the Spirit. If you do it that way, then whether you win or lose, you've played the right way. If you do it that way, then you have elevated grace above law where it's supposed to be. And then you can be a champion of morality as you're supposed to be, in a way that's like Jesus, in a way that has love and compassion in it, in a way that helps other people, to help them, not destroy them. Doesn't do us any good to become a Pharisee. So what 3 quick, easy things I think for us to take from this is pretty straightforward. Number 1, the law or morality or ethics is a tool, not a weapon. Think of it as a shield, not a sword. Secondly, does our religion help others or hinder them? That's a pretty straightforward question. Does the practice of our religion actually help people, or does it push them away? And thirdly, just do what is good. It's always the right answer to do what is righteous and holy and good.